Now, research by the National Foundation for Educational Research is suggesting the learning gap suffered by young pupils as a result of the pandemic is starting to narrow. Findings show the difference between reading and maths scores of year 3 and 4 pupils in 2022-2023 is smaller than it was compared to the same pupils pre-2020. But the organisation points out the gap between disadvantaged pupils and their peers remains wide and is still greater than before the pandemic. Let's speak live on LBC News to Ben Stiles, Head of Classroom Practice and Workforce at the National Foundation for Educational Research and also a co-author of the research itself. Good afternoon, Ben. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, good to speak to you.
So, a couple of strands to all of this. Let's start off with perhaps the positive that I mentioned there, that the difference between reading and maths scores is smaller than it was. How is that the case?
Yeah, so overall, when you look at the performance of children in these tests that were administered just at the end of last academic year, they do seem to have caught up with where they might have been had the pandemic not happened. So this is the culmination of 3 years of research where we've been tracking these children right from when they were the youngest children in school through to now when they're in years 3 and 4. And when we started the research, it was uncanny how the degree to which they were behind was in the data was the same as the length of time that they were out of school. And now, after all the effort schools have been making, overall, they seem to have caught up, it's fair to say.
Well, not so good, to say the very least, is what's happened, the gap between disadvantaged pupils and their peers, because I can certainly recall, we know that not everybody had the same experience on lockdown. Not everybody had access to computers, to any form of teaching.
Absolutely right. So, so there are two sort of less good pieces of news from this study. And the first is the one that you refer to, the disadvantaged children, and the fact that we thought the gap would open as a result of the school closures, because these children, they learn best in school, clearly. And as a result of that, the gap widened. That's the gap between disadvantaged children and their peers, and it is stubbornly wide. There's a little bit of evidence of it closing in maths, but certainly in reading, it is still as wide as it was since just after the pandemic. And it remains so. It's still a challenge.
Well, isn't it almost nigh impossible to be able to catch up? How do you find the time? How are there the resources and the availability of teaching staff to ever be able to catch up?
So our research also indicated that teachers are devoting a lot of resources to these disadvantaged children in terms of helping to catch up. And indeed, the government itself funded the National Tutoring Programme in order to help these children in particular. It is a very challenging environment out there, and actually, if you look at the resources available to schools in terms of what they're able to devote to these children, it is limited. So, for example, National Tutoring Programme, the subsidy is only 50% this year and is slated to drop to 0 next academic year. And otherwise the pupil premium hasn't kept up with inflation, so that the schools really struggle to devote the necessary resources to these children.
And is there a postcode lottery situation here again, in terms of depending on what area of the United Kingdom you had that lockdown and that experience?
The levels of disadvantage are clearly different in different parts of the country. We didn't look at the that aspect in our data, but no doubt because of that fact, we will have different levels of these children remaining behind in different areas of the country. Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for running through that data. Your co-author of the research, Ben Stiles, is Head of Classroom Practice and Workforce at the NFER, the National Foundation for Educational Research.